If Vice President Kamala Harris wins the election in 2024 and becomes president, what will she do on student loan policies? What will she do with student loan forgiveness, student loan reform, income driven repayment? There's all kinds of questions that borrowers are going to want to know answers to if she does win the 2024 election. I've got a lot of predictions for you in this video. I'm going to show you exactly what I think that she's going to do on student loan debt if she wins the White House. And I'm going to show you some of the things that I think that she won't do. And the predictions that she might make right after winning office, if she does win, might be a little shocking. So let's go into detail and look at what some of these proposals might be. Kamala Harris used to be very moderate on student loan debt. You could really say really centrist on student loan debt, perhaps maybe even the most conservative on student debt in the Democratic Party when she ran for the White House in 2020. So that's a really interesting thing to know. If you recall, back in 2020, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden were really competing over that middle of the lane of the Democratic Party that maybe they thought would be best positioned to win the nomination without being too progressive on issues that might not appeal as much to the broad electorate. So if you look at specifically what Kamala Harris proposed on student debt in 2020, it was quite a narrow program. So specifically, she would give up to $20,000 of cancellation only for people who received Pell Grants, who started businesses in lower income or disadvantaged communities. To have a three-pronged test like that probably would have required an application, and it's quite likely that because of how specific that was, and because she would have to, really her administration would have had to administer a program really targeting a fairly small number of people, it wouldn't have benefited that many folks. And so it got a lot of criticism, particularly from progressive groups that thought the program was almost worse than doing nothing just because it wasn't really helping that many people. But what she was reflecting was a very centrist instinct on student loan debt with the goal of not, spending or devoting a whole bunch of money on that compared to some of the other proposals that she supported in 2020. But like President Biden, they both became quite progressive on the issue compared to any previous Democratic administration on student debt as time evolved. So if you recall, President Biden was very skeptical of canceling student loan debt and even had a town hall where he said that he didn't want to pay for, Ivy League degrees of people to get their degrees subsidized. But early on in the administration, Kamala Harris there was a lot of tension between her team and the White House and what her policy portfolio should be, and for her to be given issues where she could be successful in these issues and not be set up for failure. So there's a lot of tension going on between the different camps. And student debt really became one of the most prominent issues that Vice President Harris became consistently mentioned in repeatedly over and over again. So specifically, if you think about, what does something, that happened in every single press release from Department of Education show about how Kamala Harris views student loans? So I recall literally in every single press release on student debt from 2021 all the way to the present day in 2024, it was always the Biden-Harris administration, the Biden-Harris administration, the Biden-Harris administration. It was never, ever the Biden administration. It was never even the administration. It was always mentioning both Biden and Vice President Harris on any student loan policy achievement that they focused on. And that suggests that Kamala Harris really enjoyed the issue and wanted her name attached to the issue. You don't just say probably Biden-Harris administration intentionally every single time with that amount of discipline unless that was intentional, right? Just as you maybe didn't see Bush-Cheney administration, a lot of policy issues just over and over and over again, unless there was a signature issue that, probably Vice President Cheney wanted his name attached to, right? So in the same way, just because of that being just very unusual, I don't really see Biden-Harris administration mentioned, in an as disciplined way in other policy areas, right? And so that suggests that she's passionate about student debt. So that suggests that student debt is something that if Kamala Harris wins the White House in 2024, she will be caring deeply about versus having it be a side issue. Another thing to really pay attention to, women and minority voters have disproportionate student loan debt. So it's no secret that, female voters have 2/3 of student debt. Black voters are disproportionately burdened with student debt. It's a very heavy issue for the core of the Harris political base of support. So this is another really key, suggestion that student debt will stay at the forefront in a Harris administration in trying to come up with more relief programs. If we think about education, it's become very polarized politically over education in America. So, more working class people tend to vote more Republican now. More highly educated people tend to vote more Democratic than in the past. And so student debt has really become sort of a polarizing issue in the way that it was not maybe back in, say, 2012 or 2000 or something along those lines. It's never really been this much of a political issue before, probably due to just the nature of, polarization, meaning that there's one party that has a lot of base voters that are very impacted by the issue, and the other party has a lot of base voters that are not impacted by the issue. So we would expect a Kamala Harris administration to really support student debt relief with that being an issue of big importance to a key part of her political base. She'll very likely continue, of course, the defense of key Biden-Harris administration student loan programs. So things like the SAVE plan, things like Plan B cancellation, things just like any of the major programs like borrower defense to repayment stuff that they have done in the administration. So if she were to win, then it is possible that a lot of the Supreme Court rulings will not have been argued yet or not been released yet. So regardless of the final outcome, you do need a government that's willing to defend those programs to even have those programs go in front of the Supreme Court if a lower court strikes them down. So it's just very likely that she will continue fighting over the programs from the Biden-Harris administration that she helped craft. Now, she's probably also likely going to introduce new, more tailored relief programs. If I had to pick what do I think is most likely to happen in a Kamala Harris administration on student loans, I would say a bunch of more narrow student debt relief programs. So specifically, remember that things that are over $100 billion tend to draw opposition from Republicans. Things that are under $100 billion tend to not. So what I mean by that is programs like the IDR waiver, or IDR account adjustment, the PSLF waiver. Those programs did not get organized legal opposition like programs like cancellation and the SAVE plan did, and this is primarily due to the overall price tag being very different. So if the Harris administration were to lose on a lot of major court cases on the broad relief priorities, she'd probably reintroduce a lot of tailored, more narrow programs that are a lot more likely to fly under the radar. I also think that we'll see a big program on student loan interest if she were to win. It might involve just a rewriting of the interest rates of student loans. It might involve trying to codify some of the portions of the SAVE plan into law, perhaps even with some bipartisan support. It might feel unlikely, but it is possible that some of the subsidies on student loan interest, which are very popular in some parts of the Republican Party that have support from higher income earners, that might comprise a really unusual combination of political support to do something on student loan interest, maybe at the legislative level. And the other big prediction for a Harris administration on student loan debt is that we would see a lot more progressive proposals on student loan debt, even while she's trying to pursue more narrow and defined victories that are carrying over from the Biden-Harris administration. So specifically, student debt has become an issue that the Democratic Party has moved more and more progressive on, more and more, you could say, to the left. And why is that? It's because, I think in part, due to this educational degree attainment becoming a polarizing political predictor of who would support which party. And so if you have a base that's a lot more likely to support broad relief, a party is going to become a lot more supportive of that, politically, right? Also, I think that a lot of the burden of student loan debt is frankly becoming a lot more understood, and a lot more people are willing to go a lot bigger on the issue than they have in the past, due to the realization that a lot of people are being put into debts that they just could never hope to repay. So the program, of course, is very messed up. It's a wreck for borrowers, and politicians like Vice President Harris understand that student loan debt is a mess, and they're willing to go bigger as a result of that. Now, that's not the case for all candidates, of course. I think that President Trump would certainly not be nearly as generous on student loan relief programs as Kamala Harris would be. But I think that you will see what happened in the Biden administration, which was more, canceling $10,000 to $20,000 of debt, canceling $10,000 to $20,000 of interest. And I think Kamala Harris would go much bigger than that. Even if the program is introduced just for political purposes with the knowledge that it will probably fail, I think you will still see massive, large, huge attempts at widespread cancellation and widespread forgiveness if Kamala Harris wins the White House in 2024. If you have any suggestions or thoughts about what you think is going to happen in a Kamala Harris administration, or if you have suggestions as to what you hope to see on student loan debt in a Kamala Harris administration, put them in the comments. And thanks so much for watching Student Loan Planner.